Well, you speak so quietly now, Rocco, that it's, you know.
Oh, well, you know, it's my,
Did you get him?
it's my new morning.
Why don't we get started? Because I'm sure that you would rather we take every minute we can to listen to Rocco. So,
Absolutely.
All right, I'll mute everybody and then you guys unmute yourself. Did you co-host, Rocco?
I did not. Let me.
Okay. Oh, just-
I've got Rocco spotlit, so he'll be there all the time, which is probably not what you want because you want you and him to talk. So I'll unspotlight him as soon as you co-host him.
All right. The trick is to co-host him.
Oh, come on, you can do it.
Rocco Galati.
Yeah.
How come I don't see him in the participant list?
He's invisible.
He is invisible.
Participating, that's
He's
why.
right there.
Because he's the superstar. He's on that list.
Come on, Teddy.
Superstar list. Unmute.
Put GAL in the search bar at the top.
Rocco, how you feeling?
As opposed to what?
As opposed to 2 years ago.
Well, I'll give you a brief briefing.
Okay, I'm gonna mute
Okay.
everybody.
Feeling
Hang-
versus who are you feeling?
Never mind. Never mind. I'm muting everyone. Yep.
I finally found you, Rocco. I've made you a co-host. Well, let's begin. Wonderful, wonderful to have all of you here tonight. I think this is the largest crowd we've had in a long time. Rocco, I didn't know that you were so popular.
Neither did I, Ted. Neither did
So
I.
a warm welcome to all of our members, a special welcome to those joining us for the first time. My name is Ted Kuntz and I'm the president of Vaccine Choice Canada. And now to our guest this evening. We are delighted to invite Rocco to join us this evening. I know all of you were aware of his fragile medical condition earlier this year, and you sent your prayers for his recovery.
Yeah, I just want to thank everybody for that. I say, because you know, I can't lie, Ted. I come to this meeting reluctantly and screaming only out of respect to my client, VCC. Yeah, I want to thank everybody and thank you for your prayers while I was ill. Just briefly, I'm not 100%. I'm still recovering. This vocal cord problem you see is likely permanent as a result of my intubation. I got ill over Christmas. Was in ICU on January 2nd. I was hospitalized, and I had myself released from against medical advice on the 22nd of January after going through a very brutal 12-day coma and almost 30-day bedridden hospitalization. I had myself transferred to a private care facility where I was 100% paralyzed. So I had to rebuild and get my strength back. I didn't return home till March 2nd. So, and then since then I continue to recuperate. I'm not 100%, which doesn't bother me because ever since I was 6 years old, every adult and every person I knew always said to me, Rocco, you know, you're not 100%. Eh? So I'm quite used to it. And I've been making my way back slowly. As I said, I still have some physical issues I'm dealing with. But, you know, by the grace of God, my mental capacities are no crazier than they were before and no less hampered than they were. So I'm all there and more. My actual analytical abilities have actually increased. That was a shock to me. I'm gonna have to study that. Maybe that's what happens when you have near-death experiences, is all your abilities heightened for survival purposes, and I'm glad about that. And I want to thank all of you who sent their prayers, and especially certain close friends who've been there for me, who visit me regularly. I'm really appreciative of that. And so I had my first court appearance on May 31st which is not long ago. It was a motion to strike on the Action for Canada statement of claim that we filed in British Columbia. The court is still reserved on that. And in early June, I had my first public appearance. I think Joel and Margaret were there at the alternative education reference conference. And I got to tell you now, if I speak for an hour and a half, 2 hours, it takes it out of me. I'm still working on regaining my endurance. And so I just want to update everybody on what's happened since. My wife, in addition to taking care of me and making sure I got proper care, despite the hospital fuck-ups, and the care I wasn't getting that I wanted. And that's a long story that'll become public later. We have not, my office has continued to pursue the other cases we had promised to pursue. So we are continuing on with the doctors' cases we're doing. I had a couple of them argued and decided before I went into coma with Dr. Turek. I had not an insignificant win in Dr. Turek's case, where I brought the judicial review, but the divisional court said, well, since they haven't pushed ahead to discipline her yet, we're going to say that this application is moot, and therefore we're not going to hear it now. Come back to us when and if they discipline her. But as part of that challenge, I challenged the College of Physician and Surgeon of Ontario's directive of April 30th of 2021. If all of you recall, maybe not. In that directive, the CPSO said that no doctor or surgeon shall criticize whatsoever any policy of any public health official with respect to COVID-19, and that they could be disciplined or have their license removed if they did. Of course, Dr. Turek and other doctors, that's all they're proceeding on is their free speech. And in that same decision that said we're not hearing it now, they said and smacked the college a good backhand by saying, and by the way, that policy that you want to challenge, Mr. Galati, we wouldn't have reviewed it under the charter anyway, because it's not law. It's not binding on doctors. It's merely the opinion of the CPSO. So in essence, they won their short-term application to not hear me on the bigger issues with respect to the CPSO, but they lost a big issue in that the court agreed with me that if it's a question of pure speech, the CPSO cannot discipline a doctor for free speech, only for the practice of medicine and incompetence in that practice of medicine. So that was a big win. And so we're now involved in two other cases that are progressing. I had a scheduling call this morning with the divisional court. There are two cases we are pursuing. One is the Dr. Killian case, which I'd taken on just before I got sick, and that was carried on by my co-director at the Constitutional Rights Center, Paul Slansky, and my spouse, Amina Shirazi, came in on behalf of, I had issued an application on behalf of Dr. Killian and her patients. And my spouse, Amina, is representing the patients. Since then, we have another doctor by the name of Dr. Kuska, and I'm representing the patients, and Paul is representing Dr. Kuska. These two cases are the first time, if you can believe it, at my insistence, the first time in the history of the CPSO where any lawyer has thought to say, hey, you know what? The patients have the greatest interest in their records and information, and no other health lawyer in the history of this practice has ever involved the patients. We are the first lawyers to say, no, the patients have rights. And they're saying to their doctor, because they're not complaining about their doctor, we don't want our information, including our identities. we've initiated the proceeding in John and Jane's Doe, including our identities, handed over to the CPSO. And so now the Attorney General has come on board because we've issued a notice of constitutional question. And Dr. Killian's application is being argued September 28th. And Dr. Kuska's probably short time after that. So we're going to bat, not just for the doctors, but for the patients. Because really, somebody some disgruntled member of the public said this doctor is issuing mask exemptions, and the CPSO, what? Their inspectors get to know that you got treated for gonorrhea or had an abortion or whatever your medical condition is. It's outrageous, outrageous. And so there's plenty of precedent for that. Years ago, I was involved in formulating a test that eventually became the O'Connor test, where victims of sexual abuse no longer had to fork over their entire therapeutic records. They go through a process where the court screens it and decides whether they're relevant to the defense or not. Anyway, make a long story short, those doctors' cases are in the thick of litigation and resolution with respect to not just the doctor's right to their records, but more importantly, the patient's rights as well, and the doctor's rights to free speech and criticizing COVID measures, which is not insignificant. So also, we made good on our promise in herding schizophrenic cats and organizing the federal workers. We filed on May 30th of this year, we filed a lawsuit on behalf of 640 federal workers who were told take the jab or lose your job. No coincidence that 2 short weeks later, in that lawsuit, we also challenged the vaccine travel mandates. And it's no coincidence that 2 weeks later, our illustrious Prime Minstrel, I'm referring to him as Prime Minstrel Trudeau, actually suspended the travel vaccine. I think he's going to try to play cat and mouse with us and say to the court that, oh, you don't need to hear the case anymore because we've suspended the travel mandates. But of course, they have to hear the case because they've also sued for back pay in violation of their charter rights. So that's been filed. On June 15th, the other set of schizophrenic cats we heard were the Ontario health workers. That's nurses, doctors, hospital workers who were put to the same extortive intimidation by the provincial governments through their hospitals. And in the province, if you want to sue the Crown for damages, you have to give them 60 days notice. So we furnish that 60-day notice with the statement of claim as a proverbial draft statement of claim, but it's going to be the statement of claim. And you have to give them 60 days notice before you can issue with the court. And that 60 days is up on August 15th, so we're filing. And we're 92% to the point of having organized the third huge case, which we're calling the first responder and essential workers case. Same MO, and that's police, firefighters, ambulance drivers, sanitation workers, and transit workers at various municipalities across the province of Ontario. And I hope to be given, not hope, I will be giving notice by August 15th and filing that October 15th, and that'll go. So those are the cases that are ongoing. The VCC case that we filed in 2020, the CBC was threatening what they call an anti-slap motion because they're a broadcaster. So we've decided as to cut them loose, because under the law, if somebody brings an anti-slap motion, the entire case cannot proceed any farther. So we're going to discontinue against them and be putting the defendants on notice to either plead and or bring whatever motions to strike that they threaten to bring. Otherwise, we're moving, and we intend to move in any event for summary judgment on that. So that's going to move ahead. What I want people to remember, and this has been frustrating to me for no end, is that the VCC, I call it the VCC, there are other plaintiffs in there. Of course, the VCC claim that was initiated in 2020 was initiated as a shot across the bow because nobody else was coming forward. It is a massive general umbrella challenge that effectively aimed itself at two really serious concerns: the possibility of mandatory strap you down vaccination and the masking. Soon after we filed, they quickly in Ontario backpedaled and put in regulations that allowed you masking exemptions in the wording and scope that we were advocating. So the masking injunction became moot because anybody could invoke an exemption who had the wherewithal to do so. And they then never did bring in mandatory vaccines. If they pretend to, will be in there on a fast injunction. But what I want people to understand, and we've been saying this from the beginning, is that this is not Hollywood. Constitutional issues are not always resolved in the courtroom. They're resolved by preemptive action that has the government have a second sober thought about what they're doing. Okay, so it's not as if the VCC challenges had no effect, particularly in Ontario. It has had a huge effect on what the government has thought they can or can't do. Second of all, it's always been, VCC's, as VCC put out their statement to you members last year, it's not that they want to be the exclusive proprietary monopoly to litigation. A lot of the issues that were raised, for instance, in the umbrella challenge by VCC are now being pursued within the specifics of the federal workers challenge, the health workers, the first responders. You have to understand you can't just challenge everything at large, although we pleaded the whole agenda back in 2020 and we're called conspiracy theorists. And everything that we put in there 2 years ago has come to be and more, right? So yeah, people have to look at the total picture of what this law office is doing with the various clients we represent, all right? And that everyone has a litigation strategy, and it's not in my interest or anybody else's to fully divulge that litigation strategy to the other side, okay? That has to be understood. So the other thing too that people have to understand is that in the initial claim in 2020, we did not seek monetary damages because if you did, you needed the leave of the court. What we sought was declaratory relief strictly on the law. With the federal claim, the BC action, the health worker claim, and the first responder claim, we're actually asking for money for the plaintiffs because they've been directly affected. They've been directly affected in terms of loss of their job, their dignity, their charter rights. And so the stakes have gone up significantly. And I think this is one of the reasons we have become more and more of a threat to the governments, okay? And I'll be open to taking some questions later. And to just make you understand the level of the threat that we've become, 2 years ago I predicted, and I also mentioned it to Ezra Levant in the interview he did with me about a year ago, that eventually the governments will try to move to paint. And Ted, you'll remember we had this discussion many times early on as we were moving along. They'll try to paint critics of the COVID measures as terrorists, okay? And you see what's happening to the truck convoy, people they're trying to persecute. So UNESCO has a committee that was struck in 2017 to deal with the radicalization, primarily in the Muslim community, of Canadians who were going abroad to fight in conflicts. And it's called I can't remember the exact name, the Committee for Prevention of Radicalization, Terrorist and Violent Conduct, right? Well, this lame UN agency commissioned a report by about 12, scraped bottom of the barrel academics at the University of Sherbrooke and two at the University of Quebec in Montreal, UQAM, and some of their students and researchers. And this group of quote academics put out a 130-page report in French only that came to my attention 2 days ago, that was released May 30th, just 6 weeks ago, in which they highlight, based on social media posts only, and I only use Twitter. They have me down as using Facebook. I don't use Facebook. I think they're confused with Wholehearted Media, which I ran with Rajie Kabli. But so they highlight 45 people who they say are the leaders, who are leaders and the leading conspiracy theorists in Canada and Quebec. And they really hone in on 3 or 4 of us. Me, Maxime Bernier, and Ezra Levant, and Stéphane Blais, who heads the Fondation in Quebec. And what they're saying in this report is that we are encouraging and festering radicalization, terrorism, and violent actions through the anti-COVID-19 measures. Now, this is the first time I've ever seen a UN agency report commissioned, but not published in all the official languages of the UN. They've only published it in French. Obviously, their intention is to slide it through and see if they can get me, Ezra, and Maxine listed, and maybe everybody on that list, on the terrorist list under the criminal code. Of course, we're taking court action. I'm taking court action. I'm suing them for defamation and negligent investigation and a host of other torts. I now, regrettably, have become one of my biggest own clients. This is the 4th lawsuit I'll be issuing in my name to these people who, think they can just attack me without response. The first lawsuit I issued is against Alexandra Moore and Canuck Law out west, where they published articles depicting me, saying that I am not really a constitutional lawyer. I am not Canadian because I wasn't born here. I can never be Canadian, despite my being a Canadian citizen. I'm a foreigner. I'm a terrorist. I'm a mobster. I am part of the Jewish cabal that runs the world, on and on and on. So she's been sued. I've also had to sue Kip Warner out in BC for his vicious interference with the Action for Canada and his nonsense, and in instigating a complaint to the Law Society of Ontario. I drafted and issued a lawsuit against the Law Society of Ontario because I've had 9, count them, 9 complaints in the last 14 months because of my COVID-19 litigation. Do the numbers, 9 in 14 months is what, every 6 weeks? Now, the first 8 were dismissed, but of them, they forced me to respond to 3, including these depraved, racist, anti-Semitic complainants. Now they've asked me to respond to a 4th, and I've had enough. I've just had enough, so I'm going to sue them too. So I got 4 losses. I will, with this UNESCO action, I will have 4 lawsuits in my personal name, because you can't just let these things go, because I know where they're going. I know where they're going with this. I've always known. Call me what you want. And so that's basically the state of that.
It tells me, Rocco.
I think, I have enough confidence that Ted Kuntz will also be on that list with me if they put us on the list. And VCC maybe. But I've warned everybody of VCC for 2 years of that. I don't think anybody will say that I'm lying, that I didn't see this coming. But seeing it coming and have it actually happen are 2 different things. And I'm not putting up with this shit. I'd never have. So that's the wrap up, as it were, the long and short of it, of what's happening. And let me check my notes, Your Honor, in case I missed anything.
What it tells me, Rocco, is they're afraid of crossing you in court.
Well, I think they're not just afraid of me, they're afraid of all of you who see the shit from the fresh air, right? And of course, they're not just afraid of me. And, I did an interview with the reporter for Rebel News in Montreal yesterday and said, well, why do you think they're doing this? I said, well, think about it logically. They've targeted Bernier for the political movement against these measures. They've targeted Ezra Levant as the primary alternative media criticizing these measures. And they've targeted me as the primary juridical obstacle, the legal obstacle to their measures. I mean, they're quite calculated and they're depraved, Nazi-like propaganda, right? I mean, how do you do a report like that? And you can look it up; it's on the internet. How do you do a report like that without even calling the people you're writing about? How does a lawyer my caliber, with all the successes I've had in the courtroom, all of a sudden become a conspiracy theorist encouraging radicalization, terrorism, and violence? Really? Are they fucking serious? Now, there have been a couple of articles right away in Quebec saying this is ludicrous, saying Galati, Levant, the other person on this list is the actress Lucy, I can't remember her last name right now, who's quite vocal on the streets of Montreal. Say, how dare they put this label? And it's interesting, because they use the old CIA bullshit definition of a conspiracy theorist. And that doesn't even make sense. They define a conspiracy theorist as a person who believes that all major human events are directed by some secret society somewhere. Well, let's break that down, okay? Number one, I, Maxine, or Ezra, none of these people fit that definition. But unless you're talking about the rotation of the Earth and geophysics that are immune to human interaction, if you're talking about socio-economic and political decisions of human societies, decisions are made either in the open or in secret or a combination of both. So what the fuck is the big deal to know and concede that certain major events and decisions are made in secret? That's a fact. Not all of them. So they're creating a straw man and expecting it to scream when they torture. It's a ridiculous. So people don't even analyze past that point. So, and I've said this before, and I'll say it again, I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I'm a conspiracy analyst. And I think I and my clients in the COVID context did a pretty good job 2 years ahead of the game in analyzing this conspiracy. It's a conspiracy. Yeah, so what? To me, that's not a dirty word, because conspiracy is an indictable criminal code offense under the criminal code. And conspiracy is an actionable tort in civil law. Okay, so there you have it. So that's about all I have to say so far, subject to any questions, of which I reserve the right not to answer.
So Rocco, before we go to the questions, I want to just underscore something that you've said that I think is important. And the Board of Vaccine Choice Canada, because we've had so many conversations with you about legal strategy here, has been schooled or been educated on how you position in terms of your legal strategy here. But most people measure the effectiveness of a court submission based upon what a judge decides. And what you've helped us to understand is there's more to educating the impact of your legal proceeding than simply what happens within the court. It's also how the defendants respond and how the public responds.
Right.
And I want to go back. I want to go back to our July the 6th, 2020 filing. I mean, we were the first organization to come forward and talk about the global agents in this pandemic. We talking about the World Economic Forum, the World Health Organization, Fauci.
Right.
We brought awareness to a dynamic that was hidden from the public.
Right.
And I would suggest that that was maybe the most important impact we've had to date.
I agree. I agree totally. So let me give you a beautiful example. And I see my good friend, an ex-client, Connie Fogel, on my screen. Hi, Connie. And she'll understand this because, you know, I got my education on these fucking globalists from my good friend Connie. It was her committee that hired me in 1996 or 97 to challenge, to bring my first challenge. It was an education on globalization treaties, on the multilateral agreement on investment. We were then in Quebec City in 2001 on the FTAA. And then the last globalization issue I took up was only a few years ago with Paul Hellyer. Paul Hellyer challenged the CETA, the agreement, the trade agreement with Europe. And we had five, in the CETA case, we had 5 issues that we were raising. As a result of our filing, this dishonest prime minstrel actually fixed 4 of the 5, so we wouldn't go to court. So we had the 5 objections we had to that treaty was: 1, it was always my position that these treaties have to be sanctioned by Parliament. Number 2, there was no protection for provincial exclusive rights to natural resources. Number 3, there was no protection for Indigenous rights under the treaty. Number 4, there was no protection for subsidies to education and medical care. 5, the big one, and Paul and I had these interesting discussions, was that no nation state has the jurisdiction to make a private foreign entity or individual have the same power or exceed the powers of the nation state that gives the authority to a nation state to sign the treaty. So what happened? Trudeau put the treaty through Parliament. Trudeau re-scrambled the treaty and protected the provincial resource rights, Indigenous rights, and removed medical and educational subsidies as breaching the treaty. So anybody looking at that who's an asshole would say the same thing. Oh, Mr. Gladdy, you didn't go past the pleadings. Well, we didn't need to. The pleadings did it all. Now, nobody knows that because the treaty was 2,894 pages long. I had to analyze it and plead it. And when they reintroduced it into the House, and they did this on purpose, they scrambled the order of the treaty in case I was coming back. So I had to reread it and compare it with the first version of the treaty. Okay, nobody out there is reading 3,000 pages of a legal text to understand what the impact of our statement of claim was. Okay, and that's just the reality of the cafe culture. These things are not fixed over a coffee at Starbucks. Okay, you can vent and criticize all you want. You know, it's just unfair to the people who have to do the heavy lifting. And when I say that, I'm not referring to myself primarily. I'm the secondary agent of the heavy lifting. The heavy lifting is done by my clients to organize and fundraise so we can get to court even on a reduced retainer. Okay, and so you're quite right, Ted. This can't be lost on people, you know. And it's at some point, Connie might pipe in. I mean, before I represented Connie in her committee, people couldn't even spell globalization. I mean, there were protests and people knew. Connie Fogel raised the consciousness of Canadians with our litigation so that they understood what these globalist monsters were doing. Without that litigation, I don't think that consciousness would have been raised as quickly. She may disagree, she can pipe in. But VCC is doing the same with the COVID measures. Action for Canada, all the doctors fighting, okay? And now you see it's turning around. 4 weeks ago, the Indian Supreme Court, which is not a slouch of a Supreme Court, our court has cited their cases in the past. The Indian Supreme Court came down with a resounding unanimous decision. And it said this: number one, not only are mandatory vaccines unconstitutional as violating bodily integrity, which is the same as our Section 7, that's the case law in Canada, but any coercive measure that tries to bypass your right is also equally unconstitutional. And while a government has the right to try to mitigate a pandemic through measures, given the scientific and medical data available to us right now in the world, it's conceded that because the vaccinated can transmit and receive the virus just as easily as the unvaccinated, any treatment and differentiation of treatment as between the vaccinated and unvaccinated is unconstitutional, is a breach of the right to equality under the Indian Constitution. So we now have a federal court, a federal appeals court, striking the masking on planes on the basis of under the same rationale of the data. Okay, so the other lesson to be taken from that is sometimes I know people get anxious, sometimes things have to mature. Not only has the resistance on the ground swung to our side, the judicial pronouncements are starting to swing. Unfortunately, Canada is the most conservative, rabid, dictatorial place. But you can see in different parts of the world, even in common law jurisdictions, the courts now are ruling against the governments on these measures. Okay.
Rocco, can I just interrupt for a second? Because
Sure.
I want to add to your point and the points that Ted is making. Do you remember how hard it was for us dealing with the non-governmental organizations in Canada who were presenting themselves as these saviors for the Canadians while they fought us tooth and nail to stop
Right.
us from doing what we were doing? And so
I remember that well.
now we have organizations like VCC who are truly leading in the
Right.
fight. But at the time, we stood alone against these
Right.
bastards who
Right.
really went after us, stopped us, tried to stop us left, right, and center. I mean, I had to threaten one time that I just dragged them, whatever, it doesn't matter. But anyway, so we had, those were interesting beginning battles, but they were important roles that needed to be played. We've done them. And thank you so much, in case I don't get a chance again, thank you so much for hanging in here to live and be back in this time and not running off, off into the next Netherlands where maybe